Chapter 22. The Eternal Vow. The Garden of Night bloomed only once each year. For a single evening when the twin moons reached perfect alignment in Valenheart's midnight sky, flowers that had remained dormant for 12 months, unfurled petals of deepest indigo, palest silver, and richest obsidian. Their perfume a heady mixture of night jasmine, moon lilies, and something older that had no name in any mortal tongue, saturated the air with intoxicating sweetness. It was said that to breathe deeply of this fragrance was to glimpse eternity. Isolde stood motionless among the blooms, her transformed senses overwhelmed by the garden's splendour. 3 months had passed since her resurrection in the blood's sanctum. 3 months of adjustment, of learning to inhabit a body that was hers, yet irrevocably changed. The white shift she wore, simple, unadorned, caught the combined glow of the twin moons, making her appear almost ethereal despite the new solidity of her immortal form. Her silver-streaked hair had been left loose, cascading down her back in waves that seemed to capture and hold moonlight. The constellation scars from the thorn crown remained across her brow, a permanent reminder of sacrifice and transformation. "You're doing it again," Cassian observed from the garden path, his voice gentle with understanding. Isolde blinked, returning from the sensory trance that still occasionally claimed her. "The sense," she explained, unnecessary for one who had witnessed countless fledgling vampires adjust to their enhanced perception. "They don't just smell like flowers. They carry memories, history." "Yes," he agreed, stepping closer but careful not to crowd her. "These gardens were planted when Valenheart Castle was first built. The soil remembers every season, every bloom, every hand that tended it. And now, so do you." She extended her awareness outward, marveling at how much information her transformed senses provided. The distinct heartbeats of mortal servants working in distant wings of the castle, the subtle vibrations of bat wings folding and unfolding in the bell tower, the taste of approaching rain still hours from falling. "How do you bear it?" she asked, not for the first time. "The constant everything?" Cassian moved to stand beside her, close enough for comfort but still granting her space. "You learn to filter," he explained. "To focus on what matters and let the rest become background. In time, it will be as natural as breathing once was." "Breathing," she echoed with a small smile, placing a hand against her chest where her heart still beat. Slower now, steadier, immortal rather than mortal. Another adjustment. He mirrored her smile, the moonlight catching on the sharp angles of his face, softening them with silver. "You're adapting more quickly than most. The high houses are impressed." "The high houses can keep their approval to themselves," she replied, a flash of her former fire warming her altered voice. "I didn't return from beyond the veil to impress ancient vampires who spent a millennium enabling your father's tyranny." "And yet," Cassian observed wryly, "their support has proven useful in rebuilding the court, in establishing your legitimacy as queen." Isolde sighed, acknowledging the political reality they faced. The vacuum left by King Renatus's fall had created dangerous instability throughout the vampire realms. Without the High House's tentative backing, civil war might have already erupted among competing factions. "I know," she conceded. "Lady Seraphina made that abundantly clear during yesterday's council. Her exact words were, I believe, 'My blood flows in your veins now, niece. Try not to waste it on foolish idealism.'" Cassian's laugh was soft but genuine, a sound that had become more frequent in the months since her return. "My aunt has always had a gift for combining threats and endearments." "Is that what that was?" "I found it difficult to tell the difference." Isolde turned from the moonlit blooms to face him fully. "The coronation is tomorrow night," she said, her voice growing serious. "The court remains divided. Many still believe no former mortal should sit on the obsidian throne, regardless of transformation or prophecy. "Many are fools," Cassian replied simply. He reached for her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a gesture that had become habit, a tactile reminder of the bond that had defied death itself. "You died to save this kingdom from my father's madness. You returned to ensure our child would live. If anyone has earned the right to rule, it's you." The child within her, miraculously preserved through death and resurrection, stirred as if in agreement. Isolde placed her free hand against her slightly rounded abdomen, still marvelling that this small life had survived everything they had endured. "The pregnancy progresses normally," she mused. "Virel says the transformation has actually strengthened the child rather than harmed it. Apparently the combination of mortal origin and immortal essence creates possibilities." "Possibilities that terrified my father," Cassian reminded her gently. "That led him to execute countless mortals and vampires who dared to love across the divide." "Your father's fear was based on memory," Isolde countered. "On trauma he never truly processed. On a curse placed by something from beyond the veil." She looked up at the twin moons, their perfect alignment creating a halo of silver light that bathed the Garden of Night in ethereal radiance. "We have an opportunity to rewrite that narrative, to heal what he broke." Cassian's expression softened as he studied her face, the determined set of her jaw, the compassion in her transformed eyes, the quiet strength that had first drawn him to her in the temple gardens a lifetime ago. "You truly believe it's possible," he said, wonder colouring his tone. "Even after everything, the betrayals, the battles, the blood, you still believe in a better world?" "I have to," she replied simply. "Otherwise, what was it all for? The suffering, the sacrifice, the death and rebirth? If we simply perpetuate the same cycles of fear and control that defined your father's reign, then nothing changes. We merely exchange one tyrant for another." She moved closer to him, her transformed body adjusting to its new grace, her movements fluid in ways her mortal form had never achieved. "Tomorrow night, we establish the foundation for everything that follows. The court will watch, the kingdom will listen, the high houses will judge. What they witness must be different from anything they've seen before." "Different how?" Cassian asked, though his eyes suggested he already anticipated her answer. "The king is dead," Isolde said firmly. "Long live the queen." She met his gaze directly, unflinching. "You won't take the crown, Cassian. Not tomorrow. Not ever." Something flickered across his features, not disappointment or resentment, but a complex emotion that combined relief, pride, and lingering concern. "The court expects a king," he pointed out. "A millennium of tradition demands male succession." "The court expected a mortal girl to die in the trial by blood," she reminded him. "They expected the thorn crown to destroy me. They expected the void blade's poison to consume my soul. Their expectations have proven consistently unreliable." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "So the obsidian throne will have a queen with no king." "The obsidian throne will have a queen," she corrected gently. "And beside her, not a king but a prince consort, a partner, an equal in all things save the crown itself." Understanding dawned in his immortal eyes, beautiful, ancient, filled with a love that had traversed death and returned undiminished. "You would have me serve rather than rule." "I would have you stand beside me," she clarified. "Advise me. Challenge me when necessary. Support me always. But the final authority must rest with one voice, not two. And after what we witnessed under your father's reign, it should be your voice," he finished for her. "The voice of someone who knows what it means to be powerless. Who understands the cost of tyranny from the perspective of those who bear its weight rather than those who impose it." Yes. Relief softened her features, the tension in her shoulders easing. She had anticipated resistance, prepared arguments to counter his objections, His immediate understanding, his willing acceptance, was unexpected but deeply welcome. The high houses will protest, he warned, practical despite his support. Particularly House Mortis and House Nocturne. They've never recognized a queen who ruled in her own right, let alone one so recently mortal. Let them protest, Isolde replied with newfound confidence. Their blood flows in my veins now, freely given for my resurrection. By their own ancient laws, that creates obligation. Family. They cannot deny me without denying themselves. Cassian laughed again, this time with genuine delight at her quick grasp of vampire politics. You've been studying with Lord Darius. Every evening, she confirmed. While you've been meeting with the military council, rebuilding the Blood Legion's loyalty, I've been learning every law, tradition, and binding ritual the old houses recognize. I won't enter tomorrow night's coronation unprepared. He raised her hand to his lips, brushing a kiss across her knuckles with a reverence that made her newly immortal heart quicken. You continue to amaze me, Isolde Valenhart. Death itself could not diminish your determination. Death simply gave me clarity, she replied softly. When everything is stripped away, status, identity, future, what remains is essence. And my essence, it seems, is rather stubborn. Stubborn, he agreed with fond exasperation. Defiant, compassionate to a fault, and wholly, infuriatingly right about this. He released her hand only to drop smoothly to one knee before her among the night-blooming flowers. The gesture, a proud immortal prince kneeling before his former mortal bride, carried symbolic weight that transcended personal devotion. Tomorrow night, he said, his voice carrying the formal cadence of a vow, I will kneel thus before all of Valenhart. I will pledge myself, not as king, not as ruler, but as consort to the queen, as guardian of her reign, as first among her subjects, rather than her equal in authority. Isolde felt the impact of his words, the sincerity behind them, the sacrifice they represented for one raised to expect a crown, the love that made such sacrifice not merely possible but natural. Rise, my prince, she said softly, extending her hand to help him to his feet. Save such gestures for the coronation. Here in this garden, under these moons, we need no formal declarations. We need only truth between us. He stood, his height still imposing despite her transformation, his presence still commanding regardless of titles relinquished. And what truth would you have of me tonight, my queen? Tell me you're certain, she requested, sudden vulnerability creeping into her voice. Tell me you won't resent this arrangement as years pass into decades, as decades fade into centuries. Tell me this choice, to stand beside rather than above, is one you can embrace for eternity. Cassian's expression softened further, understanding the fear beneath her question. For a millennium, he said quietly, I watched my father rule alone, isolated by power, corrupted by fear, incapable of trust or genuine connection. I saw what the crown did to him, how it warped even his capacity to love. He gestured to the garden around them, to the kingdom beyond. I never wanted that throne, Isolde. I accepted the possibility because duty demanded it, because there seemed no alternative to my father's reign. He took both her hands in his touch grounding her heightened senses, focusing her perception on the moment rather than the overwhelming input of her transformed awareness. But you, he continued, you create alternatives where none existed. You see possibilities beyond tradition or expectation. You transform limitations into strengths. A smile warmed his features, genuine and unguarded. I would rather stand in your light for eternity than cast shadows from a throne built on fear. Isolde studied his face, more visible to her immortal eyes than it had ever been to her mortal perception. She could see the minute shifts in his expression, read the absolute sincerity in his gaze, sense the steady certainty of his conviction through the bond they shared. Then it's decided, she said finally. Tomorrow night, Valenheart crowns its first true queen, and beside her stands not her master, not her superior, but her chosen companion, her equal in all things save final authority. An arrangement that will scandalise the court, terrify the high houses, and quite possibly incite rebellion among the old guard, Cassian observed dryly. Yes, Isolde agreed with a small smile. Isn't it wonderful? His laugh echoed through the garden of night, startling luminous butterflies from their perches among the moonlit blooms. They rose in a silver cloud around the couple, their wings catching the combined light of the twin moons, creating momentary constellations that mirrored the scars across Isolde's brow. Come, she said, tugging gently at his hand. We should return to the castle. Tomorrow will demand our full strength and focus. Together they walked the winding paths of the garden, passing beneath arches of night-blooming vines and between fountains whose waters ran black as ink under the midnight sky. The castle rose before them, its silhouette transformed since King Renatus's fall, its jagged towers softened by reconstruction, its windows now illuminated with welcoming light rather than forbidden behind heavy curtains. Already changes had begun throughout Valenheart. The infamous bride halls had been dismantled, their occupants freed to return to mortal territories or remain as honoured guests rather than potential sacrifices. The Blood Legion had been reformed. Its purpose shifted from enforcement to protection. Its ranks open to candidates based on merit rather than bloodline. Small steps, initial changes, the foundation for greater transformation to come. As they approached the castle's western entrance, a figure detached itself from the shadows, tall, elegant, wrapped in midnight silk embroidered with silver thread. Lady Seraphina of House Morvain stepped into their path, her ageless beauty unmarred by the subtle signs of tension around her eyes. "Nephew," she greeted Cassian with a slight inclination of her head. "Niece," she added, the familial term for Isolde carrying unmistakable political significance despite her neutral tone. "Aunt," Cassian replied carefully. "You're abroad late this evening." "As are you both." Her arctic gaze shifted to Isolde, assessing the former mortal with unconcealed interest. The Garden of Night is an auspicious place to walk on the eve of a coronation. Its blooms are said to whisper truths to those with the wisdom to listen. "And what truths have they shared with you tonight, Lady Seraphina?" Isolde asked, meeting the ancient vampire's stare without flinching. A smile curved the older woman's perfect lips. That change comes whether we welcome it or not. That adaptability, not strength, determines survival. Her gaze flicked briefly to Cassian before returning to Isolde. "That crowns sometimes find unexpected heads to rest upon." Isolde felt Cassian tense beside her, his hand tightening fractionally around hers. "The plans for tomorrow night's ceremony," he began. "Are known to me," Lady Seraphina interrupted smoothly. "As they are known to all the high houses by now, court whispers travel faster than wind through these halls." "And your position on these plans?" Isolde inquired directly, refusing to play the political games of implication and inference that vampires had perfected over centuries. Lady Seraphina's smile widened slightly, revealing the tips of fangs that somehow looked more elegant than threatening. "My blood flows in your veins now, Isolde Valenheart. My essence contributed to your resurrection. By the oldest laws of our kind, that creates obligation." "Family," Isolde corrected gently, "not merely obligation." "Family," Lady Seraphina conceded with surprising grace. "Yes, and family, even dysfunctional immortal family, supports its own." She straightened imperceptibly, her posture shifting from casual elegance to formal declaration. "House Morvain will stand with the Queen tomorrow night. The other houses will follow our lead, however reluctantly." Relief washed through Isolde. though she was careful not to show it overtly. Lady Seraphina's support, and by extension, House Morvain's considerable influence, significantly improved their chances of a peaceful transition of power. "Your support honours us," she said simply. "My support is pragmatic," Lady Seraphina corrected. "You've proven remarkably difficult to kill, niece. I prefer to align myself with forces that endure rather than oppose them." Her perfect features arranged themselves in an expression of amused resignation. "Besides, the entertainment value of watching you upend a millennium of tradition appears worth the political risk." With that backhanded endorsement, she inclined her head once more and stepped past them, continuing her solitary walk through the moonlit gardens. "That," Cassian observed when she was safely out of earshot, "was unexpected." "Was it?" Isolde asked thoughtfully. "She contributed to my resurrection willingly. She claimed kinship with me openly. Perhaps Lady Seraphina simply recognizes the inevitable more quickly than her peers." "Perhaps," he agreed, though uncertainty lingered in his tone. "Or perhaps she plays a longer game than we can yet perceive." "Almost certainly," Isolde acknowledged. "But tonight, I'll accept her support without questioning its motivation. Tomorrow brings challenge enough without borrowing trouble from shadows." They continued their path to the castle, entering through doors that opened silently at their approach. Servants bowed respectfully, some with genuine deference, others with the careful neutrality of those who had served under King Renatus, and now watched warily to see what would replace his reign. The halls of Valenhart Castle had changed since Isolde had first walked them as a frightened mortal bride. The oppressive darkness preferred by the old king had been banished, replaced by tasteful illumination from crystal sconces and silver candelabra. Heavy draperies had been removed from windows, allowing moonlight to spill across marble floors in geometric patterns. Ancient tapestries depicting vampire conquest had been replaced with newer works showing landscapes of Valenhart territories, scenes of both mortal and immortal significance. Small changes, symbolic shifts, the visual representation of a kingdom in transition. They made their way to the royal apartments, no longer the cavernous, forbidding chambers King Renatus had occupied, but a suite of rooms redesigned to Isolde's specifications. Warmer colours, comfortable furnishings, spaces designed for contemplation and conversation rather than intimidation. As they entered, Virel rose from a chair near the hearth, her weathered face creasing in a smile that softened her normally stern countenance. The old witch had become an unexpected ally in the months since Isolde's resurrection, her practical wisdom providing guidance that transcended the mortal-immortal divide. "I was beginning to wonder if you'd forgotten our appointment," she said by way of greeting, gesturing to an array of vials and pouches arranged on a nearby table. "The strengthening tonic must be prepared precisely at midnight to maintain its efficacy for tomorrow's ceremony." "Forgive us," Isolde replied, crossing to embrace the older woman briefly. "The Garden of Night proved more distracting than anticipated." Virel snorted, though affection tempered her gruffness. "Easy to lose track of time when you have eternity stretching before you. Some of us still measure our days in mortal spans, Your Majesty." The title, used neither sarcastically nor sycophantically, but with the simple acceptance of established fact, caused Isolde to pause. Throughout the castle, throughout the kingdom, people had begun addressing her thus, in anticipation of tomorrow's coronation. Yet somehow, hearing it from Virel's lips made the reality of her position sink deeper. "Not yet, Queen," she demurred, moving to examine the prepared ingredients. "In all ways that matter you already are," Virel countered, her knowing eyes taking in the subtle changes in Isolde's bearing, the new confidence in her movements. "The crown is merely formal acknowledgement of what already exists." Cassian moved to the balcony doors, opening them to admit the night air. "I'll leave you to your preparations," he said. "The Blood Legion commanders await my final instructions for tomorrow's security arrangements." Isolde nodded, understanding the necessity of his departure while feeling a pang at their separation, a lingering effect of her transformation, this heightened awareness of his presence and absence. "Return when you can," she said simply. "There are still matters we should discuss before dawn." He crossed to her, brushing a kiss against her temple, a gesture both intimate and respectful, acknowledging both their personal connection and her emerging authority. "Until later, my queen," he murmured, the title carrying none of the irony or resistance she had feared. When he had gone, Varel began organizing her ingredients with practiced efficiency. "The transformation progresses well," she observed, her tone clinical but kind. "Your aura strengthens daily. The child thrives. The bond between you and the prince deepens rather than diminishes with your change." "Yes," Isolde confirmed, seating herself at the table and reaching for a mortar and pestle to assist with the tonic's preparation. "Though some adjustments remain challenging." "The thirst," Varel nodded knowingly. "It never fully disappears, they say. Even the oldest immortals feel its pull, though they learn to manage it with dignity rather than desperation." Isolde's hand moved unconsciously to her throat, where the constant burning need for blood had become her constant companion since resurrection. Cassian had helped her learn to feed without causing harm, to take only what was freely offered, to control the predatory instincts that came with her new nature. Still, the thirst remained, a reminder of the price paid for her return from beyond the veil. "The court watches how I manage it," she acknowledged. "They judge my control, my restraint, my ability to maintain humanity despite its absence. And they will continue to watch," Varel said pragmatically, measuring crimson liquid from a crystal vial into the mortar. "A queen must expect constant scrutiny, constant judgment, particularly a queen who was mortal mere months ago." "I never wanted a crown," Isolde admitted softly, grinding the mixture with more force than necessary. "When I came to Valenhart as a potential bride, my only ambition was survival. When I bound myself to Cassian in the Ash Rite, my only hope was love enduring beyond judgment or prophecy." "And yet," Varel observed, "here you stand on the eve of coronation, preparing to assume the throne that stood empty for a millennium whenever King Renatus retreated to his private domains. Here you prepare to rule a kingdom that has known only one master for longer than written history records." "Because someone must," Isolde replied simply. "Because the alternative is civil war among vampire houses. Because the mortals who serve this court deserve protection from the power vacuum my actions helped create." She sighed, setting down the pestle to look directly at the witch. "Because if not me, then who? Who else stands between worlds as I do now? Who else understands both mortal vulnerability and immortal power?" Varel added dried herbs to the mixture, their pungent aroma filling the chamber with notes of earth and copper and something ancient beyond naming. "The thorn crown marked you for this," she said quietly. "Not merely as Cassian's bride, not merely as mother to the prophesied child, but as ruler in your own right. Its constellation remains across your brow, a permanent reminder that some crowns cannot be removed once placed." Isolde's fingers traced the silver scars that formed a delicate pattern from temple to temple. Painful when first inflicted, now simply part of her transformed appearance. "Do you think I can do this?" she asked with sudden vulnerability. "Rule a kingdom of immortals? Change traditions that have stood for millennia? Create something better from the ashes of Renatus's reign?" The old witch studied her face, seeing beyond physical features to the essence beneath. The soul that had traversed death and returned, changed but unbroken. "I think," she said carefully, "that you have already done the impossible several times over. What is one more miracle to one who has cheated death itself?" A smile touched Isolde's lips, small but genuine, a moment of confidence amid lingering doubt. Put that way, a mere coronation seems almost mundane. "There will be nothing mundane about tomorrow night," Varel promised, her weathered hands continuing their work with the tonic ingredients. The twin moons remain in alignment, an omen not seen in 3 centuries. The high houses gather in one place for the first time since Renatus declared himself sole ruler. A former mortal takes the obsidian throne while carrying the first half-immortal child born in a millennium. She shook her head, wonder mixing with concern in her expression. No, Your Majesty. Tomorrow night changes everything. For Valenheart, for the vampire realms, for the mortal territories beyond. What you begin with that crown cannot be undone. Good, Isolde said simply. Some things should never be undone. Together they completed the strengthening tonic, a mixture designed to support Isolde's still adjusting body through the rigours of the coronation ceremony. When finished, the liquid glowed with subtle inner light, neither fully silver nor gold, but something between, like captured moonlight in liquid form. Drink this at dawn, Varel instructed, decanting the mixture into a crystal vial. Then rest through the day. Conserve your strength. The ceremony will demand more of you than you anticipate. Isolde accepted the vial, tucking it carefully into a drawer of the nearby writing desk. Thank you, she said sincerely. For this, for your guidance these past months, for your willingness to serve a queen who was mortal when you first met her. I serve the crown that serves the kingdom, Varel replied with unexpected formality. I served Renatus because I had no choice. I serve you because I believe you may yet heal what he broke. The old witch gathered her remaining supplies, packing them methodically into her leather satchel. Don't prove me wrong, Your Majesty. With that blunt admonition, she bowed slightly and took her leave, her stooped figure disappearing through the chamber doors with dignity that belied her years. Alone, Isolde moved to the balcony, stepping out into the night air to gaze upon the kingdom that would soon formally acknowledge her as ruler. Valenheart spread before her, the castle grounds with their moonlit gardens, the city beyond with its mixture of ancient spires and newly rebuilt districts, the territories stretching to the horizon, some mortal, some vampire, all now looking to the castle for guidance in the power vacuum left by Renatus's fall. So much responsibility, so much expectation, so much possibility. She placed both hands on the stone balustrade, feeling the texture of the ancient granite with sensitivity her mortal fingers could never have perceived. Through this enhanced touch, she sensed the history embedded in the stone, centuries of rain and wind, of vampire hands identical to her own now, of winter frost and summer heat. The castle remembered, as all things in Valenheart seemed to remember, and now her immortal senses allowed her to access those memories. Behind her, the chamber door opened and closed quietly. She didn't need to turn to know Cassian had returned. Their bond hummed with his proximity, a warmth that spread through her transformed body like sunlight after storms. The Blood Legion is prepared, he reported, crossing to join her at the balcony railing. Security arrangements finalized, the coronation path cleared and consecrated according to tradition. And the high houses? She asked, still gazing out over the kingdom. Restless but compliant, he replied. Lady Seraphina's support appears to have quelled the worst objections, at least publicly. Lord Erebus remains sceptical, but has promised neutrality. The twins seem almost excited by the prospect of change after centuries of stagnation. And Lord Thanatos, Cassian's expression darkened slightly. House Mortis remains non-committal. Their role in overseeing the rituals of immortal passage grants them certain privileges of ambiguity, meaning they won't openly oppose us but won't actively support us either, Isolde translated, political acumen sharpening with each day of her transformation. Precisely. He moved closer, his shoulder brushing hers in casual intimacy. But with 4 of the 7 high houses either supportive or neutral, our position is stronger than we might have hoped. She nodded, absorbing this assessment with the pragmatism her new role demanded. And after tomorrow, when I wear the crown formally rather than merely by implication? When you kneel before me in full view of the court, relinquishing your claim to the throne? Then we begin the real work, he said simply, rebuilding what my father destroyed, healing rifts between mortal and immortal realms, creating space for something new to grow from the ashes of the old order. Isolde turned to face him, studying the features that had become more rather than less precious to her since her transformation. Enhanced perception allowed her to see details her mortal eyes had missed. The exact pattern of gold flecks in his crimson irises, the subtle variations in his midnight hair, the almost imperceptible lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of rare smiles across centuries of existence. "Are you afraid?" she asked softly. "Yes," he admitted without hesitation. "Not of change, not of challenge, but of failing to create something worthy of your sacrifice, of wasting the opportunity your resurrection has granted us." She reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining with practiced ease. "Then we won't fail," she said with quiet certainty. "Whatever comes, whoever opposes us, whatever traditions resist our vision, we face it together. Not as king and queen, not as ruler and consort, but as partners who have already conquered death itself." "Partners," he echoed, raising their joined hands to his lips. "Yes, that word suits us better than any titles the court might bestow." Above them, the twin moons hung in perfect alignment. Silver and gold, night and twilight, immortal and mortal symbolism merged in celestial harmony. Their combined light bathed the balcony in radiance that seemed to promise possibilities beyond tradition or expectation. Tomorrow would bring the coronation, the formal acknowledgement of a transformation already complete in all ways that mattered. The beginning of a reign unlike any Valenheart had known. But tonight, in this moment of quiet before ceremony, they stood simply as themselves, Isolde and Cassian, bound by choice rather than duty, by love rather than prophecy, by a connection that had proven stronger than death itself. Together they gazed out over the kingdom that awaited their guidance. Together they breathed in the night air, filled with promise and uncertainty in equal measure. Together they stood on the threshold of something new, not merely a change of ruler, but a fundamental shift in what rule itself might mean. And as the twin moons blessed them with celestial light, they made a silent vow, not with words or ritual, but with the simple pressure of hands clasped in shared purpose. A vow that would endure beyond crowns and thrones, beyond prophecy and politics, beyond death and resurrection. A vow, quite simply, eternal. Chapter 23. Blood and Peace. 5 years passed like whispers in the halls of Valenheart Castle, where once the obsidian walls had absorbed light and hope in equal measure. Now tall windows permitted the glow of both moon and sun. Where once tapestries had depicted conquest and subjugation, now they illustrated scenes of cooperation between realms, mortal hands and immortal working side by side to rebuild what centuries of isolation had broken. And where once the obsidian throne had dominated the great hall, a monument to singular power and terrible loneliness, now stood a circular table of polished ash and silver, with no seat higher than another. This transformation had not come easily. Not all immortals embraced change willingly, especially those who had thrived under the old king's reign. There had been rebellions, 3 major uprisings in the first year alone, each quelled not by extermination, but by the unfamiliar practice of negotiation. There had been assassination attempts, poison in the queen's chalice, a blade meant for the prince consort's heart, traps laid in corridors where the royal couple walked. All had failed, not merely due to vigilance, but because the bond between Isolde and Cassian somehow warned them of danger moments before it manifested. As if their connection existed slightly out of time, perceiving threats before they fully materialized. But on this particular evening, the 5th anniversary of Isolde's coronation. The castle breathed peace. The rebellion of House Nocturne had been resolved through diplomatic marriage rather than bloodshed. The border disputes with mortal territories had been settled through trade agreements rather than conquest. And the last of King Renatus's loyalists had finally sworn allegiance to the new order, their resistance worn down not by punishment but by persistent evidence of a better way. Isolde stood at the edge of the eastern grounds, surveying what had once been the infamous feeding gardens, places where mortals had been kept like livestock, their blood harvested without consent for immortal consumption. She had ordered those gardens razed in the first week of her reign, the soil burned and salted, the walls demolished stone by stone. Now in their place stood the beginnings of an academy, a place where mortal and immortal scholars would study together, where knowledge from both realms would be preserved and expanded, where the brightest minds from either side of the veil could collaborate without fear or prejudice. They said it couldn't be built on cursed ground, came a familiar voice behind her. They said nothing would grow where so much blood had been spilled. Isolde turned, a smile warming her features as Lord Darius approached. The ancient vampire moved more slowly these days, leaning on a staff of polished ebony, but his eyes remained sharp as ever, missing nothing. They were wrong, she replied simply, gesturing to the green shoots pushing through soil that had once been barren. Life returns where it's welcomed. With considerable assistance, Darius observed wryly, nodding toward the dozen mortal gardeners working alongside vampire botanists, their combined expertise coaxing growth from reluctant earth. 8 mortal soil mages, 4 vampire blood alchemists, and enough enchanted compost to fertilize half the kingdom. Hardly a natural recovery. Natural, Isolde mused, watching the workers. What is natural, Darius? Was it natural for vampires to isolate themselves for a millennium? Was it natural for mortals to be treated as food rather than equals? Perhaps what we call natural is merely what we've grown accustomed to accepting. The old vampire chuckled, the sound rusty from disuse. 5 years as queen, and philosophy has replaced politics in your speech. Perhaps I should reconsider my retirement. You'll do no such thing, she said firmly. You've earned your rest, old friend. Besides, your replacement as royal historian has your complete approval, as I recall. Something about the first sensible appointment in 5 centuries? Darius's weathered face creased in a reluctant smile. Young Roland shows promise, he admitted. For a mortal, his grasp of immortal customs is adequate. High praise indeed, Isolde noted dryly. Especially considering he'll be the first mortal to serve on the High Council in recorded history. The first of many changes that would have been unthinkable under the old reign, Darius acknowledged. Though not all the high houses share your enthusiasm for innovation, Your Majesty. They don't need to share it, she replied, watching as workers raised another stone column at the Academy's entrance. They merely need to accept it. Adaptation has always been the true strength of immortals, despite what tradition suggests. A bell tolled from the castle's western tower, 7 chimes marking the hour when twilight would soon give way to true night. Isolde straightened, the simple movement carrying the unconscious grace of one who had mastered her transformed body completely in the years since her resurrection. The naming ceremony? She said, a flicker of nerves crossing her otherwise composed features. We should return to the castle. Darius nodded, turning with her toward the path that led back to Valenhart's imposing silhouette. The court has gathered, he informed her. All 7 high houses are represented. Even House Mortis, despite Lord Thanatos's continued reservations about the unusual nature of the royal heir. Isolde's hand moved instinctively to her abdomen, now flat again after the birth 3 months earlier, her immortal body having recovered with supernatural speed from what had been, by all accounts, an extraordinary delivery. Unusual, she repeated softly. Yes, I suppose that's one word for a child conceived by a former mortal and born to a resurrected queen, though I prefer miraculous. As does most of the kingdom, Darius assured her. The birth of Princess Seraphina has been celebrated in every territory, vampire and mortal alike. Her very existence represents hope for unity that once seemed impossible. They walked in companionable silence for several minutes, following the winding path that had been constructed to emphasize the beauty of the landscape rather than the shortest route to the castle. Unlike the stark utilitarian designs favoured by King Renatus, the new Valenheart embraced aesthetic pleasure alongside practicality, an influence Darius privately attributed to Isolde's mortal origins. You know, the old vampire ventured as they approached the castle gates, there are already legends forming around the child. The servants whisper that she was born with eyes the colour of dawn, neither mortal brown nor vampire crimson, but something between. They say she both feeds and breathes, hungers and sleeps, cries tears, and drinks blood. All true, Isolde confirmed without concern. She is neither purely mortal nor wholly immortal, but something new, as she should be. And the heartbeat? Darius asked carefully. The rumours persist that despite her vampire heritage, despite being born to two immortal parents, her heart beats as steadily as any mortal's. A smile touched Isolde's lips, not the careful diplomatic expression she wore for court functions, but something genuine and slightly wondering. Also true, she acknowledged. Varel believes it's because I was mortal when she was conceived, because the transformation happened while I carried her. The old magic remembers origins, apparently. A vampire child with a beating heart, Darius marvelled, shaking his head. King Renatus is no longer here to impose his fears upon us, Isolde finished firmly. His time ended. Ours continues. And Seraphina's begins tonight, with her formal introduction to the court and kingdom. They had reached the castle's main entrance, where guards in the new Valenheart livery, crimson and silver rather than the oppressive black of the old regime, stood at attention. The massive doors swung open at their approach, revealing the transformed interior of what had once been the most feared fortress in the vampire realms. Light spilled from crystal chandeliers, their facets catching and multiplying illumination rather than absorbing it as the old fixtures had done. The walls, once covered in weapons and implements of torture, now displayed artwork from both mortal and immortal artists. Landscapes, portraits, abstract expressions of emotion that would have been forbidden under the former king's aesthetic tyranny. And the people who filled the corridors, servants, courtiers, visiting dignitaries, no longer moved with the hunched posture of those expecting punishment at any moment. They walked upright, their conversations flowing freely, their laughter no longer muffled behind hands for fear of drawing unwanted attention. Isolde noted these changes with quiet satisfaction as she made her way toward the royal apartments, where Cassian waited with their daughter for the ceremony. These transformations hadn't occurred overnight. Each represented months of deliberate effort, of policy changes, of leading by example rather than command. I will announce your arrival, Darius offered, as they reached the ornate doors that led to the private chambers. Thank you, my friend, she replied, and thank you for walking with me this evening. Your perspective helps ground me when the weight of the crown grows heavy. The old vampire bowed, deeper than protocol required, a gesture of genuine respect rather than obligatory deference. It is my honour to serve a queen who listens, he said simply, before turning to inform the guards of her arrival. The royal apartments had been redesigned entirely after Isolde's coronation, the oppressive grandeur of King Renatus's chambers replaced with spaces designed for comfort rather than intimidation. The sitting room she entered now featured tall windows overlooking the western mountains, comfortable furnishings in warm colours, and a hearth where actual fire burned rather than the cold blue flame the old king had preferred. Cassian stood near the windows, his tall figure silhouetted against the sunset beyond. In his arms, he cradled a small bundle wrapped in silk the colour of dawn, not white or red or gold, but a shade that seemed to blend all three, specially created for the princess by weavers who had worked for months to achieve the perfect hue. He turned at Isolde's entrance, his expression softening from contemplation to welcome. 5 years into their reign, the bond between them had only deepened, strengthened by shared purpose, by mutual respect, by love that had proven itself against every obstacle, including death itself. "You've been at the academy site again," he observed, noting the faint traces of soil on her otherwise immaculate gown. "How does the construction progress?" "Faster than expected," she replied, crossing to join him at the window. "The east wing foundations are complete. The library walls rise higher each day. Even the gardens begin to show signs of life despite the ground's history." She reached for the bundle in his arms, her heart swelling as he carefully transferred their daughter to her embrace. Seraphina, named for both Cassian's aunt who had aided their cause and for the seraph-like quality of her unexpected birth, stirred slightly but did not wake, her delicate features peaceful in sleep. "And how is our miracle this evening?" Isolde asked softly, tracing a finger along the child's perfect cheek. "Hungry," Cassian replied with a rueful smile. "Twice since midday. The wet nurse was quite depleted, so I provided the second feeding myself." He extended his wrist, showing the nearly healed puncture marks where he had allowed his daughter to feed directly from his immortal vein, an intimate practice usually reserved for the closest of family bonds. Isolde nodded, understanding the significance of his choice. Unlike pure vampires who could only consume blood, Seraphina required both: mortal milk for her physical development and immortal blood for her vampire heritage. A child of both worlds in the most literal sense. "The court gathers," she informed him, reluctantly shifting her attention from their daughter to the evening's obligations. All 7 houses are represented. Even Lady Seraphina herself has emerged from her northern territories to witness her namesake's presentation. "A political statement as much as a familial one," Cassian observed. "My aunt rarely leaves her domain without calculation behind the gesture." "Of course," Isolde agreed, "but tonight, I choose to see it as support rather than strategy. We need allies among the old blood, especially for this ceremony." The naming ritual for vampire children traditionally occurred when they reached 1 full year, a precaution from ancient times when infant mortality had been common even among immortals. But Seraphina's unique nature had prompted them to adapt the tradition, holding the ceremony earlier to formally establish her position in the succession and her acceptance by the high houses. "Are you ready?" Cassian asked, his hand coming to rest at the small of Isolde's back, a gesture of support that had become habitual between them. She looked down at their sleeping daughter, at the wisp of dark hair that curled against her forehead, at the delicate fingers curled into tiny fists. "Not entirely," she admitted. "Presenting her to the court means sharing her with the world, acknowledging that she belongs not just to us but to the kingdom, to history, to the future we're trying to build." "Yes," he agreed simply, "but it also means claiming her publicly as ours, establishing her legitimacy beyond question, ensuring that no faction can ever deny her birthright or her place in the succession." Isolde sighed, knowing he was right. For all the progress they had made in 5 years, politics remained politics. Immortal courtiers played longer games with higher stakes than their mortal counterparts, their plots extending across centuries rather than mere decades. "The gown Virel prepared?" she asked, glancing around the chamber. Cassian gestured toward a garment laid carefully across a nearby settee, a christening gown of such delicate construction, it seemed more air than fabric. Ancient symbols had been embroidered into its hem and sleeves, protective runes and blessing sigils from traditions so old they predated vampire society itself. "She says the enchantments are complete," he reported. "Once Serafina wears it during the presentation, no harm can befall her from magical sources, a significant protection given some of the court's reservations about her nature." With practiced care, they changed their daughter from her sleeping clothes into the ceremonial gown, working together with the synchronicity that characterized all their interactions. Serafina stirred but did not wake fully. Her extraordinary eyes, the colour of sunrise, neither mortal brown nor vampire crimson, briefly visible as her lashes fluttered before closing again. "She has your calm temperament," Cassian observed with a smile. "Any other infant would scream at being disturbed so close to sunset." "She has your patience," Isolde countered. "And, if the shape of her brow is any indication, your stubbornness as well." A knock at the chamber door interrupted their gentle banter, Lord Darius returning to announce that the court was assembled and the ceremony prepared. With a final shared glance of encouragement, they followed the old vampire through the corridors of Valenhart Castle toward the Great Hall, where their reign had begun 5 years earlier. The hall itself had been transformed most dramatically of all the castle's spaces. Where once the obsidian throne had dominated, a monolith of power and isolation, now stood the round table of governance, with 24 seats for representatives from every territory and faction within the kingdom. For tonight's ceremony, however, the table had been moved to the perimeter, creating an open space in the hall's centre. There, a circle had been inscribed on the marble floor, not with chalk or paint, but with a mixture of substances that caught the light with subtle iridescence: crushed pearl for purity, silver dust for protection, and a single drop of blood from each of the 7 high houses, freely given to acknowledge the child's place among them. Around this circle stood the most powerful vampires in the realm, the lords and ladies who had once served King Renatus with fearful obedience, and who now cautiously supported Isolde's reign with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Beyond them gathered courtiers, ambassadors, and selected representatives from mortal territories, an inclusion that would have been unthinkable under the previous regime. Virel waited at the circle's edge, her ancient form more stooped than ever but her eyes bright with anticipation. As the royal couple approached with their child, the assembled company fell silent, all attention focusing on the small bundle in Isolde's arms. "Who presents this child to the court of Valenhart?" Virel intoned, her voice carrying the formal cadence of ritual. "We do," Isolde and Cassian responded in unison. "Isolde Valenhart, Queen of the Twin Realms, and Cassian Valenhart, Prince Consort and Guardian of the Ancient Ways." "And what name do you bestow upon this child, that she may be known to both worlds and all who dwell therein?" "Serafina Isolde Cassandra Valenhart," they declared, "daughter of resurrection, heir to the Crimson Throne, bridge between mortal and immortal domains." A murmur rippled through the assembled crowd at this declaration, not merely for the power of the name itself, but for the explicit confirmation that Serafina was indeed the designated heir, regardless of her unprecedented nature. "Step forward," Virel directed, "and place the child within the circle of acknowledgement, that the high houses may witness her and offer their blessings or objections according to ancient law." This was the moment of greatest tension, the point at which any of the ancient vampire houses could formally challenge the child's legitimacy or fitness to eventually rule. Isolde felt Cassian's hand at her back, steady and reassuring, as they moved together to lay Serafina in the centre of the inscribed circle. As they stepped back, the representatives of the 7 high houses moved forward. Lady Serafina of House Morvain came first, her ageless beauty unmarred by time, her arctic gaze softening fractionally as she beheld her namesake. "House Morvain acknowledges this child," she declared, removing a ring from her finger and placing it at the edge of the circle. May she inherit our strength without our pride. Lord Erebus of House Nocturne followed, his white hair a stark contrast to his midnight robes. He studied the sleeping infant for a long moment before nodding slowly. House Nocturne acknowledges this child, he stated, placing a small obsidian stone beside Lady Seraphina's ring. May she understand darkness without being consumed by it. One by one, the remaining houses offered their acknowledgement and symbolic gifts. A vial of enchanted water from House Revenant, twin crystals of dawn and dusk from the representatives of House Dusk, a scroll of ancient wisdom from House Lumina, and a silver key from House Viatrix. Only Lord Thanatos of House Mortis remained, his grave features revealing nothing as he stepped forward last. The hall's atmosphere tightened with tension. House Mortis had been the most resistant to Isolde's reign, the most sceptical of Seraphina's unique nature, the most vocal about maintaining purity among vampire bloodlines. The ancient lord gazed down at the infant, who chose that precise moment to wake. Seraphina's extraordinary eyes, neither mortal nor vampire but something new, opened fully, fixing on Lord Thanatos, with an awareness that seemed impossible in one so young. For several heartbeats, child and ancient immortal regarded each other in silence. Then, to the astonishment of the assembled court, Seraphina smiled, a guileless expression of pure joy that transformed her tiny features. Something shifted in Lord Thanatos's severe countenance, not quite a smile, but a softening, a crack in the facade of disdain he had maintained since Isolde's coronation. House Mortis acknowledges this child, he pronounced, his resonant voice carrying a note of wonder that had never before been heard in the great hall. From within his robes, he withdrew a small bone flute, ancient beyond reckoning, carved with symbols so old they had no translation in modern tongues. He placed it reverently beside the other offerings. May she transform death itself, he added, as her mother before her. The collective exhalation of relief was almost audible as the last of the high houses granted formal acceptance. Virel stepped forward once more, raising her weathered hands toward the vaulted ceiling. "The child is acknowledged," she proclaimed. "Let her name be recorded in the book of lineage, her blood recognized by all houses, her claim to succession established beyond challenge or dispute." Isolde moved to retrieve their daughter, gathering Seraphina into her arms with a practiced motion that belied the emotion threatening to overwhelm her composure. Cassian collected the offered tokens, each a powerful artifact in its own right, together a treasure beyond price and a political statement of immeasurable significance. "In accordance with tradition," Isolde addressed the assembly, "we will now complete the ceremony with the planting of the royal heir's life tree, that her connection to this realm may be rooted in both symbol and substance." This announcement caused another ripple of reaction through the crowd. The planting of life trees was indeed traditional for royal births, but the location of such plantings had always been private, hidden within walled gardens, protected from potential desecration by enemies. What Isolde and Cassian had planned represented yet another departure from centuries of practice. The royal procession moved from the great hall through the castle's main corridors and out into the central courtyard. There, beneath the light of the emerging stars, stood a sight that drew gasps from even the most composed immortals. The obsidian throne, removed from the great hall but not destroyed, preserved as a historical artifact and reminder of the past, had been placed in the courtyard's centre. Its imposing form, carved from stone that absorbed light rather than reflected it, remained as forbidding as ever. But its seat had been hollowed out, the depression filled with rich soil brought from every territory in the kingdom, mortal and immortal lands alike, mingled together to form a single nurturing bed. Beside the transformed throne stood Virel, holding a slender sapling with leaves that gleamed silver in the starlight and roots already seeking depth. "The blood rose tree," Lord Erebus identified in a hushed tone. I thought they had all perished during the Great Burning. All but one, Cassian confirmed, preserved in the deepest vaults of Valenheart, dormant but not dead, awakened when the old king fell and the balance began to shift. Isolde stepped forward, still cradling Serafina in one arm while reaching for the sapling with her free hand. Once these trees grew throughout our territories, she explained to the assembled crowd. They flourished where mortal and immortal realms overlapped, drawing strength from both worlds. Their blooms, neither fully flower nor completely crystallized blood, represented harmony between domains that are now separated. Cassian joined her, supporting the sapling as she positioned it above the soil-filled throne. King Renatus ordered them all destroyed, he continued, believing they represented a dangerous blurring of necessary boundaries. But like many things he sought to eradicate, they did not disappear entirely. They merely waited for a time when they might safely return. Together they planted the blood-rose sapling in the transformed throne, their movements synchronized as if rehearsed, though the ritual had been discussed only between themselves and Virel. As the last of the soil was packed around its delicate roots, the tree seemed to shudder slightly, its silver leaves rustling though no wind blew in the courtyard. With this planting, Isolde proclaimed, her voice carrying to every corner of the gathering, we reclaim what was lost. We transform a symbol of isolation into one of growth. We root our daughter's future not in fear of difference but in celebration of it. The blood-rose tree will grow as Princess Serafina grows, Cassian added. Its branches will spread as her influence spreads. Its roots will deepen as her understanding deepens. And when it finally blooms, something no living vampire has witnessed in a millennium, it will herald a new era for both realms. A hushed silence followed this declaration, not the fearful quiet that had characterized court gatherings under the old king, but a contemplative stillness filled with consideration of possibilities. Then, from the back of the assembly, someone began to applaud. Others joined, the sound swelling until it filled the courtyard with approval that crossed factional lines and ancient rivalries. As the formal ceremony concluded and the gathering began to disperse toward the celebratory feast prepared in the castle's banquet halls, Isolde and Cassian remained by the newly planted tree. Serafina had fallen asleep again in her mother's arms, untouched by the historical significance of the evening's events. "Do you think it will work?" Isolde asked softly, gazing at the slender sapling rising from what had once been the seat of absolute power. "Will it truly grow here, where so much fear and control once emanated?" "I think," Cassian replied thoughtfully, "that transformation is rarely complete or irreversible. The throne still exists, though repurposed. The old fears still linger, though addressed. The divisions between realms remain, though bridges now span them." He placed his hand against the obsidian surface, feeling the cold stone that had once represented his father's unyielding authority. "But yes, I believe it will grow, slowly, imperfectly, with setbacks and challenges. But grow it will." Isolde nodded, understanding the multiple layers of his response. Their work, the reconstruction of a kingdom, the healing of ancient wounds, the building of new traditions, remained unfinished after 5 years. Perhaps it would always be unfinished, an ongoing process rather than a completed task. "I can accept imperfection," she said, shifting Serafina to a more comfortable position against her shoulder. "As long as we continue moving forward rather than back." Lord Darius approached, his ancient face betraying rare emotion as he beheld the planted throne. "Your Majesties," he greeted them, "the feast awaits. The court will expect your presence, especially after such significant departures from tradition." "We'll join them shortly," Isolde assured him. "A moment more here, if you please." When the old vampire had withdrawn, she turned to face Cassian fully, their daughter cradled between them. 5 years ago, she said quietly. When I returned from beyond the veil, I wondered if I would regret the choice. If the burden of rule, the challenges of transformation, the weight of responsibility would make me wish I'd continued toward whatever peace waited beyond. And now? He asked, his hand coming to rest against Seraphina's small back, encompassing both child and mother in his touch. Now I know with certainty, she replied, her transformed eyes, still bearing the warmth of her mortal origin despite their immortal crimson, meeting his without reservation. I would choose this 1,000 times over. The struggles, the setbacks, the slow, imperfect progress. All of it. He smiled, the unguarded expression that had once been so rare and had become, over 5 years of shared purpose and deepening bond, his natural response to her presence. Because of her? He asked, his fingers gently stroking their daughter's dark hair. Because of everything, Isolde clarified. Because what we build here matters more than personal peace. Because the world we create for her, for all the children who will follow, is worth every sacrifice. Above them, stars emerged in the deepening twilight, the same stars that had witnessed their first meeting in the temple gardens, their binding in the ash rite, her death in the throne room, her resurrection in the blood sanctum. The same stars that would watch over their daughter's growth, over the kingdom's transformation, over the slow healing of wounds centuries in the making. The blood-rose sapling stirred again in its new home, its silver leaves catching starlight and reflecting it back doubled. From the obsidian throne that had once represented fear and control, new life emerged, tentative, vulnerable, but persistent. Like the kingdom itself, like the love that had defied death, like the peace that now took root where conflict had once seemed inevitable, imperfect, unfinished, beautiful in its becoming. Together, queen and consort turned toward the castle carrying their daughter, and with her, the promise of continuation, of legacy, of something new growing from the transformed remnants of the old. Behind them, the blood rose tree settled into its unusual planter, its roots already seeking depth, its branches already reaching skyward. Blood and peace, death and life, ending and beginning, all intertwined, all necessary, all part of the story they continued to write with each choice, each policy, each act of governance and love and determination. The story that had once been forbidden, then tolerated, and now, at last, was becoming legend.